Hi and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today we're going to build this holidays calendar application that is going to show you the names and the dates of holidays in a specific country. These are the holidays for the United States in this year. The application automatically displays the holidays for the current year, so this is quite handy if you need something like that. You can use the search bar to enter a different country code, for example, GB for the United Kingdom or Great Britain. And as you can see, we are getting now different holidays for this country. And what we're going to do here is actually accessing a web API, and in this case the API from Calendarific. And I actually want to show you how to use a web API with Swift 5, and the newest features give you a great approach that you can use for almost any API out there. And this is just an example. Calendarific, I'm not paid to show this right here, but it's cool to have actually access to the holidays from over 200 countries. So this could be very handy if you would build something like that in your own application. But nevertheless, what you actually need is to sign up for this application programming interface, because you need a key. And this key looks something like this. And this is used for authentication, because it is very common that you actually have to pay for using a specific API. In this case, we can use the free tier to get 1,000 API requests per month. This is totally free and enough for the educational purposes of this video. But as you can see, there are different price plans, and different APIs have different price plans. And so that the providers can actually detect what kind of a price plan you're using, you have to use this API key. Also, this makes sure that not everybody could actually access their API without being registered. But what we do have is a basic URL that accesses the URL called an endpoint for the API. And we can use specific parameters in a URL. For example, the country as a country code in the ISO 3166 format. I've just opened this list here. You can just Google that to get a list of countries and their associated codes. As you can see, these are just 2-character codes that we're going to use, and we have to specify a year. So these are going to be the required parameters for this purpose. And we have to build kind of URL for that. As you can see here, the URL consists of the API version 2, holidays, for example, and then we have to append using a question mark the API key, which you will find here, the country, US, for example, and the year, which is 2019. So this is a string, a URL string that we are also going to have to build in our application. So we need these 3 pieces of information. And once we actually have that, we can start having a look at the results that we get from this API. So make sure to sign up, get the free tier from this for this application. Then you have an API key and you can just follow along. I have my API key prepared and ready, and I'm now going to use a application called Rested to actually access this API and give you the response body and a bit more of information. This is a cool application. You can get it for free in the Mac App Store. And in the top left corner, you can actually add your URL. So we have calendarific.com, API version 2, holidays, my API key, and the country and the year. So please just don't use my key, get your own. It's completely free, so that I also not get charged for anything here. So once we enter our query or our API request for the country US and the year 2019, we get a response from their servers with response header. For example, we can see that we got the HTTP response code 200, which means everything went okay, and we can actually expect to get some information here and a lot of additional information. For example, that we get as a content type, we get JSON information or JSON content here. And this is the actual JSON response that we get. So we get a meta information with an additional code, 200, everything is okay. If we have a look at the documentation again, you can see if we scroll down a little bit more, you can see the standard HTTP response codes, 200, for example, for success. We also have different other codes that we could use in our application to actually react to different problems that might occur. For example, you could miss your API token, or it was an invalid query, or anything that is stated right here. So just for you as an information, this is what you also find in most documentations about an API. But more interesting for us is the actual response, where we will find a dictionary. This is a dictionary that has a key holidays. And within holidays, we actually have an array of more dictionaries. So here we have the element from our holidays array, and here we have different pieces of information that we can actually use. We have a name, we have a description, we have date, we have a type, and so on. All of that can be displayed in our application, and we need to create a data model that actually maps to this information we receive from the API. So I've already created a little Xcode project so that we can start right away. It's nothing fancy. I've just added a table view controller, added a search bar. The table view cells are configured as subtitles so that we get the title and the subtitle. We're going to use the title for the holiday and the subtitle for the date. And in the view controller class, we have an outlet for the search bar. I set the delegate of the search bar to self, and if we scroll down a little bit more, as you can see here, I have adopted the UI search bar delegate in an extension just to clean things a little bit more up. And here we have added search bar, search button clicked. So once we hit return or press the search button in our application, we want to perform some code and actually look for the holidays of the specified country. Besides from that, standard table view configuration, we're just using one section. You could also analyze the dates a little bit more and add a few sections based on the months. So we could have 12 sections here and add each holiday to the specific month. And we're going to add rows depending on the results that we get from the API. But now let's keep it that way. Let's keep it that way. And let's maybe create our data model for our application. So I'm going to select my holidays table view controller and pressing Command N on the keyboard to actually create a new Swift file. And I'm just going to call that holiday. Hit return to create that. And this is where we are going to create our data model. And we kind of have to work from the inside out and analyze a little bit more what we have here in our response. So if we have a look at the response that we get from the server, we're going to have a response that is going to hold one dictionary called holidays. And if we access this dictionary with the key holidays, we get an array of objects. And these objects, so this would be one, and this would be another one. These include more information. So within holidays, we have a bunch of holiday details. I'm going to call it that way. And the holiday details include name, description, date, and so on. And we are most particularly interested in the name and the date of a holiday. And to actually get the date, we have to access this dictionary with the key date. And within that, we'll find the ISO, or this is the way they have chosen to actually name the actual date. So all of this has to be mapped to our data model. So I'm going to just make this a little bit smaller here so that we can still have a look at that. I'm going to open up my holiday Swift file in a new window so that we can look on both of these things at the same time. And what we're going to do is start from the inside out. So we're going to start with the date. So I'm going to create a struct for that. And very important, if we're accessing JSON information from a web API, and we want to make our life simple, and this is great to use it together with Swift 5, because this means we can really use a great feature using, for example, the name date info. I can name that whatever I want, but now the important part is that we're using the protocol decodable. We have also encodable. We could use codable if we actually need them to be, or we need this struct to be encodable and decodable. This could be useful if we create our own API and we want to send stuff up to the web, then we would encode it or make it encodable to actually create JSON data ourselves. But adopting to decodable makes it very easy to decode these information from the web API, this JSON information. And now very important is that we use the same keys that are used in the API. So we have to use ISO as a string for our name for this date so that we can access it later. So this was the first bit of information. So let's move up, create another struct, which I'm going to call holiday detail. And what we have here in the holiday detail, which would be an element here in this array, this would be the name and the date. So what I'm going to do is creating a new variable here for the name, which is a string, and for the date, which is now a date info object, because within the date info, we have the ISO, and this maps to the structure of our data that we have here. But also very important, let's make this struct also decodable. So this is the second part. Now let's move up. Let's create another struct. I'm going to call this holidays, which would be all of the holidays that we have here. So let's call it holidays. Also decodable. And here, what we have is a bunch of holiday detail objects. So here, creating a holidays object, and this would be an array of holiday detail objects. All right, so this is that. Now, for the last part, this would be the response, which includes all of the information that we've seen so far. So again, let's create a struct, call it response, and this would be, or let's call it holiday response. And also, this must be decodable. And here we have one variable, it's called response, and this is going to hold our holidays. So this structure of structs actually maps to the information, to the response that we get from our API. And this is something that you have to adopt to each API that you're going to use individually. But now, how do we actually access that? Using a URL request. Therefore, we're going to create a new file. So let's create a new file here, new Swift file, and I'm going to call that holiday request. And in here, we actually need to configure first of all what we'd like to access. And therefore, I'm going to create a new struct, call it holiday request. And we're going to start by defining what URL we're actually going to access. So we're going to create a resource URL, which is of type URL. So now we have that, we can work with that later. What else do we need? We're going to need our API key, which I'm defining right here. And this is very important that you add your own API key right here. I'm going to just copy and paste my own, but please use your own API key that you get from the Calendarific website. It's, again, totally free. We actually don't have too many different kinds of objects here. We are just going to work with holiday objects or holiday detail objects. We don't have users. We don't have, let's say, calendar events or whatever you could imagine for data that we can receive. For example, in a movie database, you could access movie posters, movie information, the cast, and so on. Each could be different objects that we're interested in and get on with different requests yes, then it would be worth it to create a more generic approach and make it not so specific as we're going to do it right here. But for us, we're just going to initialize our struct right here with a country code parameter, which is going to be a string. And with that, we're going to build our resource string to actually get a specific resource URL working. So if we have a look, let's maybe just create a resource string object right here, and then move over to Safari to actually copy such a URL request. And as you can see, this is what we're going to need. We need Calendarific, we need API, we need version 2 holidays, and so on. So I'm just going to copy that with the API key. I'm going to paste it right here. So this is kind of our basic resource string. And we're going to remove this key right here and use string interpolation to actually add our API key right there. And now we also have to add more parameters to our request. Using ampersand, I'm going to add country right here equals, again, we're using string interpolation right there for the country code. And the last piece of information that we're also going to add right here, ampersand year equals 2019. But I actually want this to work in every year to give me the proper year for, or the proper holidays for every year. So above our resource string, I'm going to create a date object with a format using a date formatter. Then I'm going to specify the date format right here. And I'm just interested in the year in this format. And then I can actually get the current year from my format as a string from a date object. So nothing really fancy, just getting the current year right here. And then I'm going to replace that in my resource string with the current year and string interpolation. And with that, we've built our resource string. But now we actually need a URL from that. So I'm going to use guard let statement here, create a resource URL, using URL to initialize that with a string, my resource string. And if this fails, we will have a fatal error. And then I'm going to use self resource URL to assign my resource URL so that we can access it in our whole, in the scope of our struct holiday request. And with that, we've initialized everything that we need, and we're just going to add one function here that is very interesting. We're going to call it get holidays. And this is now going to be our API request. And this is a very common way of doing things. So you could do that with get a movie poster, get music from iTunes, or use whatever API you like, and follow a very similar approach because we're calling this function. And we're doing some things here. We're creating a data task using a URL session to actually get the information. And once we have the information from the web that we need, we're going to have a completion handler or a completion closure. And this needs to be escaping. And a closure escapes a function when the closure is passed as an argument to the function, but is called after the function returns. So when you declare a function that takes a closure as one of its parameters, like in our case, you can write @escaping before the parameter's type to indicate that the closure is actually allowed to escape. And now, as a parameter, we have a result type. If you've seen my video on Swift 5 features, you will see that this is very, very handy. And what we want to return actually is an array of holiday details. So holiday detail array. And then what we also have to give our result type is an error object, because a result always has a success case and a failure case. In case of success, and we have all the data we need, we will return a holiday detail or an array of holiday details. Again, this would be the place to actually give our result type the proper type that you actually want to return. But as I said, we have this type for success, we have this type for failure, and then we actually just need to add a void here because there is no return type, and then we have our function right here. But as for the error, we can be a lot more specific right here. And if we scroll up a little, we can define a numeration. Let's call it holiday error, and use the protocol error, the error protocol for that right here. And what we can do is define our own error cases, like for example, no data available, or cannot process data. And this would also be a good place to actually implement the different errors that could occur right here. You're having these 4 different API error codes that you could create as cases here as well. But for our educational purposes here, for this tutorial, I'll just keep it simple, just using these 2 error types. And then we can also specify this specific error type here for our result for any failure. And now, with all of that in place, we can actually create a data task. And for that, we're using URL session, shared, and a data task with URL. So here we have our resource URL, which is a global property in the struct. And then we will receive data, response that we could listen to, and a possible error. So I'm just skipping them because I'm just interested in my data object right here. And again, this is a very common approach to actually getting information from a web API. This all happens asynchronous because it takes some time to actually retrieve the information from the web, especially if you're using or if you're getting images. So all of that in this closure happens asynchronously, which also means that our completion handler also is called or is going to be asynchronous with the main thread, which we have to deal with in a second. But after everything we do here in our closure for the data task, we should also remember to actually call resume on our data task to actually start downloading or accessing our API. And now, if we have received information from the API, then we can now work within this closure to deal with the data that we actually got here. And the first thing that we need is to check if we actually received JSON data. So let's use a guard let statement here for JSON data object and just assign data. If we have data, it's great, we can continue. Else, what we can do is, first of all, call our completion handler and say that this was clearly a failure and that no data is actually available. And then we return from our function because we cannot really continue. So if we have JSON data, then we can create a new do try catch statement. And what I actually want to try is using a decoder or a JSON decoder initialize it right here. And then we want to try to access our holidays response. And here I have to use a try statement because here something could definitely go wrong. Using my decoder and decode for a specific type. Again, we could be more generic right here, but for our purposes, we just want to use our holiday response self type. And we want to get this, or we want to decode this from our JSON data. And if this fails, so this is where we actually want to catch an error, we need to call our completion handler again and let's say this was a failure again, and then we cannot process the data. This could have different reasons. For example, we didn't create the model according to the structure of our data, or another error could have occurred. So that we would need to handle, but again, for this tutorial, we're going to keep it simple. But now to actually work with the correct data format, we wanted to return holiday detail objects. We can simply use holiday details right here, create an object for that, access our holiday response, the response object, holidays response, the response object, and the holidays, which is the array that we're looking for. And then we can call our completion handler, and this time we can actually be very sure that this was a success and pass along our holiday details. And this is actually the whole magic of accessing the API. We can now really test this and directly go into our holidays table view controller and our holidays table view controller and create a new array as a property right above view.load. Let's maybe create that list of holidays object, going to be an array of holiday detail objects. And we actually want to fill this array with information as soon as we have performed our search. So again, we have our search bar delegate here, and we have search bar search button clicked as the appropriate function to listen for actually users pressing on the search button within the keyboard. And the first thing that we need to check is actually if we have some text. So let's create a guard-let statement here, search bar text equals search bar.text, else we just return because then we have no text. You could also validate if we have actually a country code, but that would be too much for this tutorial. And then we can now, first of all, for the first time, use our holiday request. And this is very cool because we can just use our struct, holiday request, and initialize it with a country code. And the country code is coming from the search bar. So we have stored it in our search bar text object, our search bar text constant. And now we can use our holiday request object to actually get our holidays. And we actually don't need all of that. We can just append our closure right here because this is what it takes as a parameter. And here we have to use weak self to actually prevent any retain cycles. We can access our result object that we have specified. And then the cool thing is that we can just switch through these results. And we have two cases. We have the case of failure, and then we would get an error object, and then we can actually just print our error for now. This would be the worst case, but also the easiest case for us to implement. But what we can also do is look for our success case, which is a lot cooler. And then we get, as an object, we get a bunch of holidays that we can work with, and we should assign them to self in our list of holidays. And this would then equal to our holidays object that we got from our holiday request. So here, as you can see, I have just defined my holiday or my list of holidays as a constant. This obviously should be a variable. Let's quickly build that. Then we shouldn't have any errors left. And now what we're going to do with our list of holidays is to make it a computed property and actually listen for the didSet event of this list of holidays object, so that every time we get new information and pass it to this array, we actually want to reload the data in our table view controller, in our table view, and get the appropriate holidays for a specific country. Since this is going to be a UI thing to do, or it's going to update the UI, we need to do this on the main thread. So we are using the dispatch queue main, perform that in sync with the main thread, and then we're using our table view. We reload the data, and we're also going to use our navigation item and the title of our navigation bar, and maybe just say that we have self list of holidays count. So the number of holidays that we have found, we're just going to add that to our title of the navigation bar at the top. So we would have 20 holidays or 70 holidays found in a specific country. Now, we called reload data on the table view, which means that the data source functions are going to be called. And this also means that we need to update the number of rows in section according to a list of holidays and its count to get the correct number of table view cells. And then what we also need to do is actually configure our table view cell with a holiday object. Let's just use our list of holidays, access it with the index path.row to always get the correct holiday object. And then we're using our cell, text label, and text. We set it to holiday and its name, and cell and its detailed text label, and its text, we're going to set that to holiday date ISO for the date of this specific holiday. So as you can see now, this is the first time that we actually access the information stored in our holiday structs right here. So we're accessing the date and its ISO through all of these structs that are all decodable, which means that they're going to decode or be responsible also for decoding the information that we have stored in our JSON response. Using our holiday request, we are getting the information from our resource URL that we have defined ourselves with the correct country code, depending on the country code the user entered, the current year that we're getting from the system. And as soon as we perform our data task using this URL, we're getting data back from the specific server, which we try to actually get. We check if we actually received data. If we received data, then we're using a JSON decoder to actually decode our JSON data with the format that we have specified in our holiday.swift file. And then we just need to pass along the information we got to actually use it in our table view controller. And that was actually not too hard, was it? So this is what we've built. Let's just try this out. Enter US, for example. And here I have to accept a little warning from my firewall. But that said, we get 415 holidays. Let's also try a different country. Let me just scroll through. Maybe Zambia. ZM, let's just check what we have here. And there we have just 20 holidays. So each country is a little bit different. I hope you found that useful and you can use that for your own work with different APIs. I thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you don't want to miss any future tutorials. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.